Beneath the quiet farmlands of America's Midwest, something terrifying is stirring. For the past several months, scientists have recorded more than 200 earthquakes rippling through the ground beneath the Mississippi River Valley, a region most Americans never think of as earthquake country. The tremors are small, barely noticeable on the surface, but together they tell a story that's keeping seismologists awake at night. This isn't California. There are no towering mountains or clear cracks in the earth, just small towns, bridges and farmlands resting on one of the most dangerous hidden faults in the world. And if history is any guide, the new Madrid fault doesn't warn before it strikes. Because the last time it awoke in the winter of 1811, the ground shook so violently that church bells rang 1,000 miles away. Church bells in Boston, from an earthquake centered in Missouri. Today, the same forces are stirring again, and experts now believe the next major quake could rival anything we've ever seen in the continental United States. But here's what's keeping scientists up at night. These 200 recent tremors, they're not following the pattern anyone expected. December 16th, 1811. 2 in the morning, while most of the frontier slept, the earth under New Madrid, Missouri ripped open. Homes lifted from their foundations. Trees snapped mid-trunk. The Mississippi River, the lifeline of the young nation, suddenly reversed its flow, water flowing backward, upstream, defying gravity itself. But that was only the beginning. Over the next 10 weeks, 2 more colossal quakes struck, January 23rd and February 7th, 1812, each one stronger than the last. Frontier settlers wrote of the ground rolling like waves on the ocean, of forests sinking beneath the mud in minutes, forming what's now Reelfoot Lake, Tennessee. The shaking was felt as far north as Canada, as far east as the Atlantic coast. Modern seismologists estimate the main shocks ranged from magnitude 7.5 to 8.0, rivaling California's worst quakes. But there's one terrifying difference that most people don't understand. The bedrock of the eastern United States carries seismic waves 5 times farther than the fractured rock of the west coast, meaning one New Madrid quake doesn't just hit a city, it shakes an entire region. Imagine that power today. Memphis, gone dark. St. Louis, bridges twisted like wire, highways buckled, because scientists say those same fault lines are still alive, still locked, still building pressure. But here's where the story takes a disturbing turn. The fault has never truly gone silent. Over 4,000 microquakes have rattled the zone since the 1970s when modern seismic monitoring began, each one a reminder that pressure is rebuilding. 2 centuries later, the land may look peaceful. But beneath the farms and highways, something doesn't quite add up. Deep beneath the Midwest, the Earth is quietly shifting in ways that shouldn't be possible. Unlike the famous San Andreas Fault that slices through California, the New Madrid Fault doesn't sit at the edge of tectonic plates. It lies in the middle of one, the vast North American plate, which makes it a geological anomaly that challenges everything we thought we knew about earthquake mechanics. Hundreds of millions of years ago, this part of the continent almost tore itself apart. A massive rift began forming, stretching from present-day Arkansas toward Illinois. The continent was trying to split, but it didn't. The rift failed, leaving behind a scar in the crust, a weak zone buried deep beneath the surface. For centuries, that scar has been slowly squeezed by the immense forces that drive plate movement. Pressure builds millimeter by millimeter year after year, and when the crust can't take it anymore, it breaks. That's the standard explanation. That's what happened in 1811, and scientists believe it's happening again. Seismometers across the region have recorded thousands of small quakes since the 1970s, most too weak to feel, but powerful enough to reveal a pattern. They cluster along the ancient rift, a silent signal that stress is building once more. GPS satellites have detected subtle ground movement, a few millimeters here, a few there, the surface shifting like a slow inhale before a shout. But in the past 6 months, something changed. The microquakes started clustering in a new location, one that wasn't active during the 1811 sequence. Some seismologists argue this means the fault is relieving pressure safely, in small increments. Others point to historical records from other mid-plate faults around the world, where similar clustering preceded catastrophic ruptures. The debate is fierce because the stakes are existential, and what worries researchers most is how widespread the shaking could be when the next rupture comes. In the soft, dense rock of the Midwest, seismic waves don't fade quickly, They travel, they amplify, they ripple across entire states, shaking cities hundreds of miles from the epicenter. In California, a magnitude 7 might devastate one region. In the New Madrid zone, the same event could rattle a dozen states simultaneously. That's why scientists call this fault a sleeping dragon, buried under farmland, hidden beneath rivers, yet capable of reshaping the heart of America in a single night. But there's a possibility that some researchers are starting to whisper about in private conferences, a possibility that questions whether we even understand what this fault is doing. The air is still, the river is calm. Then, without warning, the ground begins to roll. At first, it's a vibration. Dishes rattling, windows humming. Then, a violent jolt. Roads buckle, power lines snap, bridges sway as if made of rope. This is what a magnitude 7.7 earthquake would look like if it struck the New Madrid fault today. According to FEMA's national simulation, completed in 2023 after 3 years of modelling, more than 7 states would feel catastrophic shaking at once: Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Mississippi and Indiana. Within seconds, downtown Memphis would be plunged into chaos. Brick buildings, some over a century old, collapse. Gas lines rupture. Cell networks fail as towers topple. Highways that cross the Mississippi twist and crack, cutting off rescue routes in both directions. The bridges, critical arteries connecting east and west, become death traps as their support cables snap. Further north, St. Louis trembles as the gateway arch sways several feet side to side. Engineers designed it to flex, but not like this. Old riverfront districts, built on unconsolidated sediment, crumble as the soft ground beneath them liquefies. Power plants near the river shut down automatically as sensors detect ground failure, but backup systems weren't designed for this scale of disaster. Across the Midwest, the shaking continues for nearly 4 minutes, an eternity for anyone caught inside. Then the aftershocks begin, thousands of them, some strong enough to topple what the first quake spared, each one triggering new collapses, new fires, new trauma. Power grids fail across multiple states. The interconnected network that normally allows power to flow from unaffected regions can't compensate when half the country is dark. Hospitals overflow with injured, but many facilities are themselves damaged, running on generators with fuel supplies designed to last days, not weeks. The Mississippi River becomes unrecognizable. Sand boils erupt from the ground as water surges up through new cracks. Fissures open in the riverbed. Mud volcanoes burst forth, creating new islands and submerging others. In some places, the river actually changes course, just as it did in 1811. Experts estimate that more than 80,000 people could be killed or injured, and over 2 million left without homes. The economic cost, conservatively estimated at more than $300 billion, would represent the single most expensive natural disaster in American history. And the cruelest twist is that no one would be ready. Because unlike the West Coast, the Midwest has no early warning system, no strict building codes for seismic resistance, and no real plan for when the ground beneath it finally decides to break again. But what keeps seismologists up at night isn't just the human toll. It's a question that the simulations can't answer. What if the fault doesn't rupture the way it did in 1811? What if 200 years of pressure has created a scenario we've never seen before? Most people think tsunamis only strike coastlines, ocean waves triggered by seafloor earthquakes. But during the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 and 1812, witnesses described something few believed possible, something that still doesn't make complete sense to scientists studying the historical accounts. Waves surging through the Mississippi River itself, not ocean waves, river waves, boats thrown onto the banks, the current reversing, surging upstream for minutes at a time, waterfalls appearing where the riverbed dropped, islands disappearing as the channel shifted. If a quake of that power struck today, the same thing could happen again. Only this time, the results would be catastrophic in ways the frontier settlers never had to worry about. The Mississippi is no longer a wild frontier river. It's lined with cities, fuel depots, and power plants. It's a critical industrial corridor. Ports stretch from St. Louis to New Orleans, handling nearly 500 million tons of cargo each year. Grain from the heartland, coal from Appalachia, petroleum products moving north and south. A massive inland surge would tear through docks, bridges, and levees. Tugboats and barges, Some carrying hazardous materials could be lifted onto land or capsized. Pipelines running beneath the riverbed might rupture, igniting fires that spread across the water's surface, and there are dozens of them. Natural gas, crude oil, refined products, all crossing under a river that could turn violent in seconds, and the shaking wouldn't stop there. The soft soils of the Midwest are prone to liquefaction, a process where solid ground briefly turns to liquid. During the 1811 quakes, entire forests sank as the ground beneath them lost all strength. Today, entire neighborhoods could slump or vanish into the mud just as they did 2 centuries ago. Then there's the hidden chain reaction few talk about, the Mississippi's role as a national artery. A rupture of bridges or fuel lines here wouldn't just devastate local towns, it would choke supply chains across half the country, stranding food, fuel and cargo in the middle of America. Interstate 55, Interstate 40, Interstate 24 all cross the fault zone. If even one major bridge fails, north-south traffic stops. East-west rail lines also converge here. 6 of the nation's 7 Class 1 railroads cross the New Madrid zone. A single quake could sever connections between the East Coast and the West Coast, between the Gulf ports and the Great Lakes. It's not just a local disaster. It's the kind of event that could ripple through the economy, the power grid, and even global trade, all triggered by a fault most people don't even know exists. But here's what seismologists are debating behind closed doors. The 1811 quakes caused these river effects, but no one knows exactly how. The mechanism isn't fully understood, which means we can't predict what would happen today with any certainty. The New Madrid fault doesn't roar often, but when it does, the entire nation will feel it. From skyscrapers in St. Louis to riverboats on the Mississippi, from farms in Arkansas to factories in Tennessee, the shaking won't just rattle windows, it will test everything we've built. The hardest truth is that we're not ready. Thousands of bridges, pipelines, and power stations across the Midwest were built without major seismic protection. The building, codes assumed this region was seismically safe. Hospitals and schools sit directly atop ancient fault lines, constructed with no thought to earthquake resistance. Even the ground beneath our feet, soft, wet, and unstable, could amplify the shaking instead of absorbing it. In some areas, the seismic waves could be magnified by a factor of 10 compared to solid bedrock. Scientists are racing to understand when this will happen again. GPS readings show the crust in the region is slowly shifting, millimetre by millimetre, building pressure in silence. Strain gauges buried deep in boreholes detect the stress accumulating along the old rift zone, and history tells us that silence doesn't last forever. The last time this fault broke loose, the Mississippi River reversed its flow, and the land itself was rearranged. If it happens again in our lifetime, the effects could rival the costliest natural disasters in US history. And it could happen without warning. Tomorrow or 50 years from now. The fault doesn't send invitations, but there's something else. Something the FEMA simulations don't account for. The 1811 to 1812 sequence wasn't a single earthquake. It was 3 major events over 10 weeks, each one progressively stronger. What if that pattern repeats? What if the first quake isn't the big one, but just the beginning of a months-long sequence that steadily escalates? Some researchers are now examining whether the recent clustering of microquakes is following a similar pattern to the months before the 1811 sequence. The historical records are sparse, but what exists suggests there may have been warning signs, small tremors that people noticed but didn't understand. The problem is distinguishing between normal background seismicity and a genuine warning. The New Madrid zone produces hundreds of tiny quakes every year. Which ones matter? Which ones are just noise? A team at the University of Memphis has developed an AI system to analyze the patterns, looking for subtle signatures that might indicate escalating stress. Early results are promising, but also inconclusive. The system has flagged 3 periods in the past decade as potentially elevated risk. Nothing happened during any of them, but that doesn't mean the approach is wrong. It might just mean the fault isn't ready yet. What would you do if the ground began to move beneath you right now? Would your city stand? Would your home survive? These are questions no one in the Midwest wants to ask, but everyone should. Because this isn't a matter of if. Geologically speaking, it's only a matter of when. The New Madrid fault has been quiet for 213 years. In geological time, that's less than a heartbeat. The stress is building, the crust is shifting, and somewhere deep beneath the farmlands and rivers, the ancient rift is preparing to remind us that it never truly died. Some scientists argue we could have decades or even a century before the next major event. The recurrence interval for magnitude 7+ quakes on this fault might be 500 to 1,000 years. If that's true, we're not even halfway to the next one. Others point to the accelerating microquake activity and wonder if the timeline is shorter than we think. Much shorter. The truth is, we don't know, and that uncertainty is what makes this fault so dangerous. We can model it, monitor it, and study it, but we can't predict it. Not yet. If you found this story eye-opening, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the next great American earthquake will come from the West Coast, or from right here in the heart of the country? And if you live in the Midwest, what would you do if you had just minutes of warning? Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next, because the new Madrid fault story is far from over, and the next chapter could be written any day now.